Hey everyone, Anthony here, and today we're going to run down the hottest lenses of 2024. In our last video, we ran through the hottest cameras, and in this video, we're going to run through lenses, and with lenses, some of the hottest lenses of the year did not necessarily come out in 2024, but they remain legends for long periods of time. But there are some updates that you definitely want to see. And if you're looking for the best lenses to get in 2024 and going into 2025, then this is the guide for sure. I'll separate this video into 3 categories. So we'll talk about unique lenses released this year, could be a mix of primes and zooms, but things you might not have seen and things unlike anything else on the market. And after that, I'm going to go over zoom lenses and then finishing up with prime lenses, meaning one focal length and that's it. I'm going to have chapters put on this video so you can kind of go through what you like best. So that being said, let's dive in. Sigma always makes some unique zoom lenses, like when they had the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8 lens for DSLRs. That lens was legendary for having excellent low light performance and phenomenal versatility. Since we've moved away from DSLRs and into mirrorless cameras, the market has been looking for these great low light and ultra versatile lenses. So this year, when they released the 28 to 45mm f1.8 art lens, I kind of felt a sigh of relief seeing this one pop up in a presentation, because this feels like a great addition to the lineup of low light versatile lenses but for mirrorless cameras. This one is for the filmmaker, photographer, content creator who needs that versatility and great low light performance thanks to that f1.8 aperture within the lens. This one likely is going to be a go-to, and it's available in Sony E-mount and L-mount right now. Canon and Nikon are slowly opening up and allowing Sigma to make lenses within their Z and RF mount. And as we move on, demand for this lens in an RF and Z mount will likely grow. But for now, this specific zoom lens is available in Sony E-mount, which is still a popular option for content creators. Fujifilm shooters were impressed when I went to the Fujifilm event held this year, and I just recently saw a Canadian wildlife photographer show off images using the new shockingly light 500mm f5.6. This lens is surprisingly light and incredibly sharp. The wildlife shots that they were able to capture were excellent, and I was able to take a few for myself. If you follow us on Instagram, I told a fairly funny story about how a squirrel was talking smack to my dog for like 5 minutes straight. Yeah, that was a funny one, but the lens was no joke. Fujifilm shooters shooting wildlife, this one is one to stick on the wish list for sure. I'm not sure if there is a lighter 500mm lens on the market right now. But Fujifilm also released an update to their 16 to 55. That's the 16 to 55 f2.8 version 2. We'll briefly discuss what's called the Holy Trinity in a little bit, but that essentially is 3 lenses nearly every working pro should own or wants to own. It's the 16 to 35, 24 to 70, and 70 to 200. This is the 24 to 70, but for Fujifilm cameras, and after the crop factor, which is 1.5 for Fujifilm, the 16 to 55 is a 24 to about 80, but it's kind of close enough. This is that one lens to do it all, and a short story about how when I first got started in photography and then exploring video, the only lenses that I owned for about 5 years was the 16 to 55 f2.8 and the 56 f1.2. This was a deadly combo, and now that this version 2 is much smaller, faster, lighter, and prepared for better image quality that the new cameras are actually providing, I think this is going to be a hit. Absolutely. Let's stick with another Holy Trinity lens, because Sigma in 2024 released a 24 to 70 f2.8 art lens, but a version 2. This lens is nearly half the price of the Sony version, but this lens is also available in L-mount as well. Panasonic L-mount 24 to 70 is 2,100 Canadian maple syrup coins, so this Sigma version will save you like nearly $500. Crazy savings going with the Sigma route, but if you're looking for maximum autofocus capabilities, then stick with the Sony version. But for those who don't necessarily need the best of the best, or literally like can't justify spending $3,000 on a 24-70, then the Sigma is the way to go. This is the one lens that you can pretty much do everything with, so that's why the 24-70, just across all the brands, will remain the hottest lenses of the year for many years to come. Once again, Sigma makes the list with one of the most affordable wildlife lenses available. The 150-600 is an APS-C lens only, so it's designed for crop sensor cameras, but this is by far one of the most popular wildlife lenses that we stock on henrys.com. The aperture is f5 to 6.3, so there's some variation and you will struggle in low light a bit, but for 1300 maple loonies, there is like no alternative that gives you this much zoom. These 600 millimeters multiplied by 1.4 gives you 840 millimeters of zoom on an entry-level Canon camera. The only downside to this lens is they have not brought it out for mirrorless cameras, so this is a DSLR lens, but available in Canon and Nikon mount, so it's something for those who are still loving their DSLR. If you're looking for a mirrorless version, then the RF 100-400 or RF 100-500 are also good picks. The apertures swing more than the Sigma, so the 100-400 is f5.6 to f8, and the 100-500 is f4.5 to 7.1. The 100-500 is quite good for the money, and it's an L lens, but it will still run you over 3,000 Canadian, but it's a great lens and in the RF mount, so unfortunately there isn't other alternatives for wildlife shooters on that tighter budget for mirrorless cameras. So we mentioned the Holy Trinity is the grail lenses a working pro usually strives to own. That's going to be the 16-35, the 24-70, and a 70-200. And when people refer to the Holy Trinity, we're talking about the f2.8 versions here. These are the big dog lenses, and this year Canon released a 70-200 f2.8 L IS USM lens update. The 70-200 is the ultimate wedding, portrait, event, and working pro lens. Pretty much anybody shooting photos and anyone looking for the best of the best with some reach will want a 70-200 in its variations. The 70-200 is RF mount, so it'll be compatible with the new Canon mirrorless and offers top-notch quality. This lens runs for about 4,100 Canadian loonies, but that's about what you would expect for a pro-level zoom lens to be. Weird that it's available in black and white, but I guess you could choose like what looks more pro to you.
It's not true. That's impossible.
What if you want some zoom, but you're looking for the lowest price? Check out the 50-250 millimeter lens. This lens is available across the board, so Canon has their own, Nikon has their own, and the RF is for mirrorless and the EF is for DSLR. Nikon makes the ZDX version with VR, meaning vibration reduction. So this generally is the go-to for somebody who wants zoom but doesn't want to pay anywhere near that pro level price point. Sony has come up with lenses that are close to this range but not quite, but this lens specifically is a hot seller and a go-to for somebody working on a slim budget. The downside here is the aperture varies from f4.5 all the way to 6.3, so this lens won't produce great results in the evening or in the nighttime. But this is generally the go-to for somebody looking to get something that complements the kit lens but gives you some serious reach in a very affordable price. The next lens is available for everybody with the exception of Nikon. The 10-18mm lens is a hot seller for those looking for something super wide in that APS-C format. The lens is a hot seller, but I would still call this lens actually underrated, mostly because of the Canon EF and RF mount. The aperture varies from f4.5 to 6.3, and generally the market doesn't necessarily get too hyped about these lenses. But this year, Sigma releases a new version in the RF mount and even Fujifilm X mount, and the aperture is now a constant f2.8 on this Sigma version. So this is going to be a solid low light performing lens and give you a little bit bit of blur in the background as well. If you're just looking to get into photography or videography, and if you're wanting to start vlogging or just want something wider than the kit lens, then the 10-18 is the way to go. And it's such an exciting lens because it feels very wide, even on a crop sensor camera. In this case, the Sigma is more expensive than the Canon RF version simply because of the aperture within the lens. The Sigma will run you 900 Canadian maple syrup monies, but the RF version is $449. I would prefer to have the 2.8, but for $500, I get why people are convinced to go that route. And if you're shooting landscapes, and if you get yourself a good tripod, the smaller aperture, that being f5.6, that won't really matter. So I get why people would go for the cheaper lens. The best prime lenses of any given year are generally these focal lengths and spread out across all the brands. The 100mm macro lens, mostly by Canon, but generally the 50mm, 35, and occasionally the 24, across any of the brands are always going to be hot. This year there were some exceptions with some wild twists that I didn't see coming, especially from Canon, but let's start with Sony first. Sony did some really wild stuff in 2024 when they released the fastest performing 85mm lens that I have ever tried, and I did try the new 85mm GM2. Generally, 85mm f1.4 lenses are very sharp, but not the fastest lenses when it comes to focusing speed. This was not the case with the 85mm f1.4 GM2. I was audibly shocked when I did a burst of like 12 or 15 photos, and I was looking in the viewfinder and I was like, no way every one of those photos was in focus. Every photo, it was in focus when I pulled them up on the computer. It was just crazy performance on the GM Mark II, and you can watch that video on our channel right after this. This was the most shocking performing lens, but then Canon also released the 24, 35, and 50mm lenses all at f1.4, and all of them are nearly identical in size and weight. Panasonic has already done this with their lineup of lenses, but at f1.8. Canon, and it seems like Nikon too, is now doing the same thing, but at f1.4. The big benefit here is that if you shoot on a gimbal, you don't really have to recalibrate that gimbal for each lens if they're all the same size and same weight. These are definitely targeting filmmakers, but I mean, photographers wouldn't be rattled either if the lenses are just all small and relatively the same weight. I don't think many would complain. Nikon released the 50mm f1.4 and a 35mm f1.4 this year as well. They're nearly half the cost of Canon, and I assume that we will see a 24mm soon, but I'm not too sure if it's also going to be close to that 420 grams like the new 50 and 35mm now weigh. So out of the 24, 35, 50, and 85mm lens, what would make the most sense to get? The 35mm is definitely the most versatile, one lens to do it all kind of thing. About 95% of the work that I do on a regular basis, whether it be with like Henry's or just photos for myself, that generally gets done on a 35mm lens. The focal length is great, and if you're working on a full frame camera, that's the way to do it. But if you're working on a crop sensor camera, you actually want something closer to that 24mm lens like on my Fujifilm. I would prefer a 23mm f2. I can shoot pictures of my family and it just isn't like super wide, but I can go outside and shoot a photo of a landscape and not have the lens be like too zoomed in as well. So if you're on a full frame camera, then definitely go with the 35mm. If you're on a crop sensor, go 24mm. But by far, the most popular focal length is the 50mm f1.8 lens because it's super cheap. And if you are shooting on a crop sensor camera, then I think some people do find this lens to be a little bit too zoomed in because you have to multiply 50 by 1.4 or 1.5 to get that true focal length on a crop sensor camera. But for 250 maple syrup coins, this is one lens nearly everyone will jump on right away because of that f1.8 aperture. It's just gonna blur blur the background out like crazy. You see it happening on this lens right now. The 85mm is one of the best portrait lenses you can get, hands down, and if you go the GM2, then you have incredible speed and image quality. The autofocus blur in the background on an 85mm is beautiful, so if portraits is your thing, then the 85 is the way to go and you won't regret it. So that's a wrap on the hottest lenses of 2024. And if you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section down below. I'll get back to you personally. But if you want to see the best cameras of 2024, then I'll leave a video right here. My name's Anthony, and I'll see you in the next one.